In this tutorial, I'm going to take a design that we've been working with so far in Venue Manager, strictly in a design mode, and apply it to real equipment connected to my computer through a network, what we call live mode. We will apply our design to those devices and also run through our QSCreator application, the custom application that we created, utilizing the same tools, and make sure everything works and do whatever necessary troubleshooting we have to do. This is an iterative process where you try some things out. If it isn't working quite right, you go back and make adjustments, try it out some more, and keep going back and forth until you're satisfied with the end results. So I already have my Venue Manager program is already running, and it still has all of the design information in it. My original layout was a simple design, 2 basis units. One of them happens to be a basis 922AZ. It's unmapped right now. I'm still in design mode, so it doesn't have any concept of real devices. However, indeed, there is a config file created for that one. It has 2 analog inputs from a CD player feeding a gain block. The output of the gain block, the left side of that, goes to my 2 left outputs, which drive my 2 left speakers. The right side of my gain block actually goes out as a CobraNet feed to a separate box. That's my right rack basis box, which happens to be a 922UZ. And that particular config, if we open that up and look inside, is a real simple config. It just brings in that one channel that was delivered to it and just splits it out and sends it to both speakers. We also made some very, very simple global presets. Some of those global presets turned all of the amps on and off, no matter which basis was being connected at the time. I had some presets that talked to that little gain block, low, loud, medium, and lowest level. And then also I had some presets for muting and unmuting the amp channels. And we saw that I also had a QSCreator application that, in this case, I used a bitmap image of a church, but it just happened to be the image I had handy for the tutorial. And I put some what appear to be buttons. These are really just text boxes with hotspots overlaying those to fire off different global presets for the full volume, the medium volume, the low volume. I also have a large hotspot over this general area, so no matter where the user clicks in this area, he'll bring up the master that we have, the other panel, this panel here that we call speaker levels, and he'll bring up all 4 channels along with a master for those 4 channels. That master is also duplicated on the main screen as a knob, and that one has been purposely limited to no more travel than a minus 30 dB to a plus 3 dB instead of the full stroke minus 100 to plus 12. So this is my design criteria. I'm now going to apply this to real equipment. So one way to do that is to first connect up my network, which I've done, to my computer, made sure the IP address of my computer is within the right subnet range as the basis devices I'm communicating with. And I am now going to go to the system menu, and I could go to live mode, but there wouldn't be anything in live. I haven't actually discovered any devices. So the first thing to really do is discover and map the actual devices from my design devices that are now unmapped, and go out and discover on the network what devices are actually out there. And if I click on Start Searching the Network, it will go around and find all my devices, and lo and behold, it has found 2 devices. In fact, they're the only 2 on this particular network, so I can stop searching right now. It knows that they're both a 922UZ and a 922AZ. They already have a name assigned to them, Station 1, Station 2, although in my design I called them left rack and right rack. It knows the IP address of each of those devices, so it's sniffed that out. And then it's also telling me that in one case it knows that it's using the QSControl port as opposed to the CobraNet port to communicate to it. The other one says unknown. Now that's a a rare occurrence, but the reason that one says unknown is I happen to know that that second basis unit, Station 2, the firmware is out of date. So when I add these devices and map them to my inventory, one of the first things we'll notice when we go live is one of the devices won't be fully online. We will not be able to do anything until we update the firmware. So let's go through that process. So the thing to do is map them to these individual devices. So let's pick this first one here, left drag, and we're going to map it. I'm going to click the down arrow, and it will only let me map it to any other 922AZ that it finds. And there was only one in the lower list, Station 1, and that's the one I'm going to map it to. It has now taken it away from the lower list, and it has been assigned one-to-one to my design. So let's do the second one as well. I'm going to map that unit. It's looking for a 922UZ, and of course it's the only one in my system. And lo and behold, those two are now mapped one-to-one, device by device, to my design. If I had more devices here than what were in my design, I could even add those devices by selecting unmapped devices and go ahead and pitch them into this design too. Maybe I want to modify them later. That's one great way to connect up to a system that your laptop has never been connected before, and you want to just see all the devices and start manipulating them without having to design an entire system from scratch. The gear's already on site. Why not just connect up to it, discover the devices, and start working? And that's one way you would do that. So let's say, okay, now normally we would map and discover the amplifiers. However, because I know at least one of the bases doesn't have up-to-date firmware, it probably will not discover all the amplifiers. But let's go through the process. I'll just say okay, and right away it's asking for the network connection password for the new devices. If you don't know the password, they will not come online. So QSC is the default password, and we're going to use that by default. It's already filled in. If you had changed the passwords on the devices, then you would just type in the correct password. And if you had multiple passwords, different passwords for different devices, you would start with the first password you could remember, put that one in, run this wizard again, do the second password, and so on, and eventually work through the entire system. These all happen to have QSC as the password. So I'm just going to say OK. And now it's going to start the mapping process. We'll just let it do its thing. The process takes a little bit longer the first time you map your devices, because it has to go out and not only discover the devices, but look at all 8 configs in each device and make sure that all 8 configs are passing the design rule check, the checksums work out correctly. There's a lot of communication going on here between these devices. But eventually, it gets finished. Notice that the word unmapped has now disappeared from these 2 devices. They are truly mapped to my system. However, I am still in design mode. And in my design mode, let me just look at some other screens here. I have some config designs that look like so. Let's see if I can get all these. I don't need to have everything visible. So there's the CD source DSP, that's this one here. And the other config, which I called slave, that's the config here. However, if we go to design or to live mode right now, go right into live mode, the actual equipment is displayed for me like this with a blue icon instead of a gray icon. And what's actually running in the equipment could be entirely different. If I look at this one, we see that this design is just a straight through wiring. This is my live active config inside the basis that's online. The other one I can't even really look at right now, because if I hover my mouse, we see that the state of the device has invalid firmware. I'm going to hover over that again in case you missed it. It's the right rack state invalid firmware. That's what this red exclamation point, that's what that is an exclamation point. And that's what it's telling me. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is right-click on that particular device, or if there's a lot of devices, I can actually just right-click on the live inventory icon and say update firmware. Those devices that don't have the correct firmware in them will show up with the current version of firmware and the available version, or the updated version of firmware that's available, with a check mark ready to update that one. You can see it's quite old firmware here. We're going to update it. And same thing with the CobraNet. We had quite a bit older version of CobraNet firmware in here. We're going to update that as well. During the update process for those devices out of date, it could take anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes per device, because it will update the QSControl firmware, reboot the basis, and then update the CobraNet firmware, and then reboot the basis. This is all automatically done by this firmware update wizard. There's only one device here. It's estimating that it's going to take about 3 minutes and 45 seconds or so. I'm going to go ahead and start the process, and then I'm going to skip ahead in this tutorial to the end of it. There's no reason to wait till it's completely finished. It's a waste of recording time. So I'll hit start, and we'll let the process begin. And if you could see the actual devices, you would see the transfer process, and the LEDs would be flickering very fast, and it is indeed updating. So you'll see on your screen it's going to jump ahead real fast because I'm going to get to the end of it. So now that we've updated this unit, I'm going to go through the discover and map one more time, only because the process did not discover the amplifiers that were attached, because the discovery process was kind of short-cutted or aborted, as it were, because one of the basis units was not up to date in firmware. So we'll just go through it again. It won't take long this time. We don't have to search the network again, but we'll just go ahead and let it map any discovered amplifiers it has. Say OK. Of course, it's going to be the same password. Let it go through the mapping process one more time. And this time it should find the amplifiers that are connected to the basis units. And we can see that indeed it has. Again, I've shortened up the video a little bit. It took just a bit longer than the video showed. Altogether, it probably took about maybe 20 seconds. So I chopped out a bit of the video just to save some bandwidth there. So it has found and discovered 2 amplifiers, and it's automatically named those amplifiers with the model name. ABCD happens to be the ports that amplifier is using. It happens to be an 8-channel amplifier, so it requires 4 data ports. It's a model, and it gave the name as the model plus the ports that are used plus the name of the basis. But I'm free to rename that anything I want. So let's just call it left amp, and I'll do the same thing to the other amplifier and change its names to the right amp. And indeed, those are renamed. If I now go back to design mode, I see that those devices are in here. But we still have an issue. The design configs that I have are different than the ones that are actually in the basis live right now. Now, I might or might not want to give up those configs. The config in the right rack, for example, looks like it's got some CobraNet signal coming in, and it's got some drive signal that it's doing. There might be some other information there. If I don't care about saving those, then I don't have to use them. But in this example, let's pretend that I did need to use them. Well, in that case, the best thing to do before making my design overwrite these is to save these off into the archive folder. So I'm going to click on the archive folder, and I'm going to make a new folder to hold these original configs from my design. So let's just call this original system configs. And I misspelled original. And I don't even have to say configs because we know that that's what's going to be inside that folder anyway. So I can just call it original system. And I could write it myself a note. These configs were in place when I first attached to the system. And maybe I put the date and the time or something like that in the notes. So I've got this original system folder. I am now going to put each config. I can do it two ways. I'm going to right click on a config, copy to archives, and tell it where to put it, which folder do I want to go into, and say, or create a brand new note for that archive as well. There, it has appeared under that folder under the original system. This one, instead of right clicking, I'm just going to take my left mouse and drag it right to that folder and drop it in there, and it's exactly the same thing. So now I can safely overwrite the existing configs with my new design if I want to. So I'm going to go back to design, verify that these are the configs that I want to go into the system. Yep, there's my left config, and here's the right config that I want to use. So I'm going to hit this button called sync for synchronize, and I'm going to sync my design configs into the live equipment. Be very careful. You want to make sure this arrow is in the right direction. If by chance I had been in live mode and brought up this window, it's quite possible that you would have seen the arrow pointing this way because I was in live, and it says, okay, then I'm going to take the configs from live and push them into my design, which would have blown out my design configs. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that the arrow is going in the right direction for my desired move. And in this case, I want to take my design configs and move them into the live configs. This is one of the few things that there is no undo command. If you blow out the configs, it's quite possible you might inadvertently blow out the wrong configs. You cannot redo it. So you always want to have backup copies in your archive folder and so on like that, just to save yourself. The first time you synchronize, all the configs of my design, even the ones I didn't create new ones for, will be different than the ones that are in the live. So it's going to update all 8 configs for every basis. So it's going to take a little bit longer. But from then on, after that, only the changed configs will be overwritten if I make changes going back and forth in either direction. By the way, some of you, when you do this, you may not see this window. You may see a window that looks like this. It's kind of an abbreviated form. Just hit this button, Show Devices, and it'll make sure that devices are there. And of course, you can decide which devices you're going to sync up. Usually, the only time you need to do a sync is when you actually change the configuration design. You add some new wiring, you take some wiring away, you add some new DSP blocks, you take blocks away. Those are the things you need to sync up. You don't need to make a sync just because you changed a gain value or just because you changed an EQ value. Unless you want to store that value, you want to make sure that that value does match design to live. But this first time we are going to match up design to live in this case. So I'm going to say OK. It's going to warn me, and if you don't like these nag screens, you can certainly take away the check mark, but it's always better safe than sorry. This is going to warn me that the live device config, live device data is going to be overwritten with the design device data. This action will overwrite all the configs in the selected devices and cannot be undone. It is strongly recommended that you mute any audio sources before proceeding. The reason we ask you to mute them is because we have no idea what state they're going to come up in during this update process. We have no idea, did you design it properly with channels muted or fully attenuated, those type of things. So it's always a good idea to at least temporarily mute your audio sources during this process when you're updating the configs. So I'm going to say yes, go ahead and do it, and it's going to start a sync process. Now, you cannot rely on this taskbar, progress bar going across, that it appears it's going to take this long. This is kind of like an arbitrary timer just to let you know it's still working. In fact, the sync process might take quite a bit less time than this slider shows like it's going. So the clue here is watch this window for messages. So I'm going to stop. I'm probably going to fast forward so we don't go through the whole process, and we'll see it in its final synced up mode. Okay, here we're finished. I did a sort of time lapse on that progress bar, so it took a little bit longer. I'm going to say it probably overall took 45 seconds for those two basis devices to be totally synced up. You'll see as I go back and forth that the future syncs are going to go quite a bit faster because they're only going to sync up those actual changes that I make, not the entire configs for all the bases. At this point, I have the choice, once I've done a manual sync like this, to either go back into design mode or go immediately to live. At this point, it makes no difference. When they are synced up, they are identical. So let's go to live and see if we can get this audio playing. So I'm going to go to live mode. Go into my configs just so I can view them. And because I have so many tabs open here, I think I'm just going to close out all my windows, all my tabs, excuse me, and just reopen them again just to kind of clean up some of the clutter that I have. I don't need to see all of that. We can slide this away to give me more window room too. So there's the CD, there's the DSP window. Notice I don't have a grid any longer. The title bar is blue now instead of red as it was in design mode. So that's kind of a visual clue that we're in live mode. If I go to the other rack, I'm going to bring up that config file and go into that DSP, and there's that design. And let's go back and look and make sure our audio is going to be working. So I'm going to open these up. We should see audio signal on these LEDs when I turn on my CD player. So let me turn on my CD player. Okay, there I've turned on my CD player, and indeed you can see the LEDs are flickering with audio activity, but we don't hear anything because as I go through the signal chain, there's my gain block. I do have audio passing through there. But if you recall, the output blocks are still fully attenuated, fully muted, not fully attenuated because we've been playing around with the master gain. So let me bring these sliders down. Now these are the exact same output blocks as the amp panel itself. If I come in here to the DSP, it's exactly the same controls here. So let me unmute both of those channels and bring up our levels till we have music. And you can hear the music playing in the background. Maybe I'll change my meter scaling a little bit. So now I've got good meter bounce. I've got obviously signal getting through from that particular basis. Let's go check the other unit and see if that's working correctly. So I'll go to the config file for that one. We expect to see audio here. I have no audio passing here on this one, so let's find out if we can figure out why that might be. Let me go back to the other original design. Coming out of this gain block here, I should have audio trying to get out of this basis. That audio is driving a CobraNet bundle. And if we look here, there is audio trying to get out as bundle 1000, but it says offline. As far as it's concerned, there is no device receiving bundle 1000. Well, if we look at this one is supposed to be receiving bundle 1000, but it's showing offline. It's not showing any activity. The most common cause of that is latency is not set up correctly. Let's find out. This latency is set for 2 2/3 milliseconds. Let me go look at the other latency of the other device on the CD source, on the transmitter. That's also 2 2/3. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of troubleshooting to figure out why is that audio not getting through. It should be getting through my system. So I'm going to go check my network cables and my connections. I might also have to reboot the bases sometimes, especially after a firmware update. It might require a reboot to get everything to synchronize properly. We'll look at a couple choices there, and I'll see what that is. So I'm going to take a second. Bear with me while I double check those settings. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just reboot this receiving basis. Indeed, it did reboot. Let's go ahead and reboot the transmitting basis as well. You'll hear the audio drop out as it reboots. There, it rebooted that one. The first basis that I rebooted is now offline. It's coming back up slowly on its own. We'll see the other basis for the left rack, that'll show up as going offline, and then it'll come back online on its own, and we'll hear the music probably before it comes online. So there's the two basis units waking up, coming back online. I still don't have activity, so I've got to actually check my network wiring. And we'll see if that can be corrected. And indeed, as you can see, this bundle came online, and it was a loose Ethernet connection on the back of my transmitting rack. Looking at the LEDs on the front panel of the basis did indeed inform me that my network connection was not a solid connection, and just pushing in on the connector, wiggling it a little bit, it woke up, it came alive. That's typical. That's the kind of problems we'll see. We'll look at the software, we'll look at our most sophisticated pieces of equipment, expecting to see problems when it almost always comes down to wiring issues. So let's bring up my second config now. Going to here. There's the audio coming in. Look at the DSP coming in. There's signal now coming into this one. And just like we had with the other rack, it is indeed muted and fully attenuated. So let me just mute those down and bring up the other channel. And I'm sure you can hear the audio is getting louder. Now, if I did this right, I should be able to go right to my masters and bring up the masters level. And indeed, it works as expected. Let me make the master, or let me make the slaves equal to the master. It's going to warn me. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. Of course, it dropped because it matched what the master was set for. But now they're all lined up with each other, and they will track just fine. And I can readjust the volumes, the levels, whatever would make sense. And the master will keep track of that. that part's working just fine. How about the global presets? Remember I had those list of global presets before? Let's take a look at those global presets. I'll pin them back into view. We had those listed earlier. I can also get to those global presets from this drop-down list. If we go and look at the DSP panel, and specifically I'm going to look at the gain block first, we should see, for example, I can either bring it up by snapshot control or global preset. Turns out it's going to do the same thing for me in this one. Let's go to the loud one. Sure enough, got louder. There's my medium setting. And there's the lowest level. And if we looked at the amp panels, let me make this vertical panels again so we can get our new horizontal tab here. And I don't need this one visible. What I do want is this one in a new group. And I will take the DSP down into there as well. And let's take the, let's close this out for a moment. Let's take this DSP panel here and go back to this one. Now I've got both amplifiers. The music's gone away because it changed audio tracks. So now you see the amps. Now I can individually turn these off. All 4 data ports will respond because being an 8-channel amp, it doesn't matter which button I click. All of the data ports are pretty much parallel to each other inside of a CX168. So for as far as the power mode is concerned. So here I've got very little activity on the meters because I've barely got such a low listening level. Let's bring up our listening level. There we go, a little bit louder. Let's get it down a little bit lower so I don't have to yell over top of it. Now, for this one, let's fire off my global preset that's going to talk to both basses at the same time, and let's put all amps off. And indeed, it did turn both amplifiers off. And I'm going to go back to the global preset that says turn both amps on. And they're both responding. Turning back on, you'll hear the music come back as the amps turn on. Usually you'll hear the music before the meters actually wake up. That's part of the housekeeping process, is let's get the audio there first and then take care of the GUI housekeeping. What else do I have for global presets? Oh, I had the all muted and all unmuted. And if you remember, that talked to the 4 mute buttons, 2 of the one basis and 2 of the other basis. And let's go ahead and do all muted. Oh, and it jumped screen on me, didn't it? There, it finally muted them. Now, that obviously is a little bit of a bug because it shouldn't have taken that long. Let me do all unmuted. Let's see if I can keep that window in view. Let's go back to all muted. And that one was pretty straightforward, pretty abrupt. And let's go to all unmuted. And indeed, they all went unmuted. I think you'll find you have to cycle through all of your presets at least once to kind of get everything synced up properly. And let's recall the all muted, and there they all went muted. Okay, so that's the functionality there. How about our QSCreator application? So let's check that out. First, let me get some music playing again. And click on this link. Here's my QSCreator app. And now, because it's immediately in live mode, and I am the administrator, only the administrator can run the QSCreator from Venue Manager anyway, so it's automatically a mode that's the administrator mode. Remember, we had that other user called Joe, so we'll have to test that out separately. I can't log in as Joe right now because obviously if I've got Venue Manager open, I must be the administrator. But we should be able to control levels. Let's see how my levels work. Sure, exactly working the way I want to. I can recalibrate levels. I got to remember, in this dual mode that it's in, it wants to keep cleaning up the screens. And the song just changed, obviously, right between tracks. There we go. Wait for the next track. Never fails when I'm giving a presentation. It's in between tracks. So that's working as expected. How about, let's go to low volume. It dropped down lower. Medium. And full volume. Now, if you were watching, you saw it actually changing up here in this box. Medium volume. It's telling me what was the last global preset that was fired off. Lowest level. And I could, of course, fire them directly from here. Let's go to loud. Let's go to all amps off. The amps will turn off. There it goes. And as I mentioned, you're going to have to cycle through them once. Get all my amps to turn back on. They're turning back on. We'll hear the music in a second. And now if I go back to all amps off, I expect it to pretty much happen right away. And indeed it did. And it was simultaneous. So let's get the amps back on again. There's my music back. How about this hotspot over this area right here? Remember we had a pop-up window. I have a hotspot kind of in this vicinity. Notice the cursor has changed when I'm hovering over that area. And I'll click on that, and there's my pop-up panel with the master. And because this master here that is available to the administrator lets me actually get louder and quite a bit softer than the master that we gave on the front panel. That's by choice. It's your choice how do you want to run it. Let's mute all, which if I fire this off, mutes all 4 channels, and that's the global preset, all muted. And if I hit unmute, that's all 4 channels, and that's all unmuted. I can individually turn an amp off. I can turn both the second amp off. I can turn 1 amp on and leave 1 amp off if I want to, but certainly a global preset can say, no, 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 I want them all off or all on. Let's make them all on. So I fire that command off, and there, indeed, it did come to the on state, and we'll see the music start to wake up here on this other amplifier in a second. There it is. So, I now have a custom application. I did a synchronization to live equipment, loaded all my configs, got my venue manager all synced up, got my QSCreator working. Now, let's get QSCreator working by itself as a control screen. So I can close this out, and I can actually close out Venue Manager. We know Venue Manager is going to work. I'm just going to completely close out Venue Manager. It's going to ask me, do I want to save any changes? Yeah, it's probably a good idea to save the most recent changes that I did. Let's go ahead and launch QSCreator now. Very similar to how we launched Venue Manager, but go right directly to QSCreator. This could also be a shortcut right on the desktop, like so. I could also put that in the startup folder so it launches automatically. So double click that. Now when you launch QSCreator by itself, it's going to ask for a username and a password. And I told you that there's 2 users, one by default, always some guy named admin, and the password by default is QSC. Of course, the administrator is allowed to change the password. And in fact, there's my custom app. Let me resize it just a little bit, make it look a little prettier. There's a help file that comes with this that It gets you right into the venue manager help, specifically to the QSCreator windows, so that the user can see what's this QSCreator thing. The administrator, because the administrator is logged in, has the same tools, the option tool to show tabs or hide tabs available to them, the security tool, add more users, what their properties are going to be, and so on. And administrators are allowed to change their own password or change any user's password. I can look at the event log. The event log will pop open, and here's the event log being populated by all those things that were set up in Venue Manager to monitor and keep track of. Really, all I can do with the file menu is just exit the application. If I exit the application at this point, now, again, music's changed to another track, so you'll hear the music, you'll hear the music start back up in a moment. Okay, so the music's playing back. Let me log into QSCreator now. I'm going to log in as Joe. Remember that user I had, Joe? I don't have to capitalize the name. Usernames are not case sensitive, but passwords are. And so, again, the password by default, QSC, I haven't given Joe a different password. Joe gets to log in, and notice that the window is automatically resized because of what the administrator did. Joe does have control of levels. He can click on these buttons down here. It went to the medium mode, full volume or loud, low volume. He can also fire off global presets because I gave him permission to have access to those global presets. So therefore he can access this drop-down menu. He can even turn off the amps, and the amps turned off, and now I'll turn the amps back on, and we'll hear the music in a moment once the amps come back on. Let's bring up the full volume so you can hear it. Now, what Joe cannot do is click on this hotspot and go anywhere. If I click on it, he's going to get a message that he has no access. The system administrator has restricted access to the panel for the current user. So Joe is not allowed to get to that because I didn't give him permission to. So I know he can't go in and mess up the individual level controls of those channels. It'll be just fine to give him a master level control and individual buttons, as it were, for the snapshots or presets that I want to give him. So there's QSCreator in its glory. We're going to be adding more features to QSCreator as time goes by. But for this first release, we think it's very good, very useful. We think most people will really enjoy the end result. You can get really, I've seen some beautiful, gorgeous control panels, some with metallic looking screens and different kinds of meters. It's just gorgeous. Some of the results you can get. So please experiment. Give us a call if you have any questions. Give us an email. You can reach us from the website and get to our email addresses from there. Certainly you can go to the users forum that's on our website under the tech support menu and get to the users forum and ask questions there. And we'll be more than happy to answer those for you. So thank you for taking the time to go through this tutorial and all of these tutorials, and I hope you find it useful. There will be other tutorials that we'll be adding to this over time as user needs develop, and hopefully you'll come to find QSControl to be as useful and versatile for your system as you want it to be.